there. We're at Skeetchestn Community School. This is the grade 4-5 students. My name is Maureen Zoots, and we have a demonstration of very brand new seeds like Joe and Dante have in their hands. We have two methods of starting seeds, so getting them to germinate, which means to start to sprout.
Right here is where we put the seeds, and the reason why we put them in the bag is because the moist air goes up and it turns into water, but we don't want it all to leave, so that's why we have it in this bag. They start sprouting, and after a while, that's when we can start putting them into the ground. And the reason why it's wrapped in paper towel is because if you just put them in a bag full of water, that won't be like the best. But if you have some sort of like good surroundings around the seed, it will help it out a little bit better. And also, this decomposes as well, so it won't be much as a big mess in our dirt and stuff. So when we plant it, the seeds, they start, because they already are starting to sprout. I'll show you guys. They're starting to already have their little sprouts going up. When we plop them in the ground like this, it won't take as long for them to grow. It's going to need a lot of nutrients and everything, but if we do it this way, it's just faster.
White Hochaitip, Emma Gottfriedson in Skokst, to Tk'emlúps Equin. Today I will be teaching you words in Secwépemc from our video. La es Swach. La es Kult. La es Kult. La es Kult. Tk'emlúps. Tk'emlúps. Tk'emlúps.
So the next thing we have is seed starter mix, peat moss and Gaia green, worm castings, which is another word for worm poop. This is perlite.
That's the white little rock-looking thing in here.
Yeah.
And that gives it good nutrients.
So that holds the moisture, and you're not always having to worry about watering your plants. So you want to do mostly peat moss, and then a couple of handfuls of perlite, a little bit of your Gaia green, and some worm composting. This soil mixture is what's in these trays, and Chalet has some seeds here. And we're going to need something to label. I don't know if they're... Okay, so we can take those out and start planting, guys.
Okay, I'll just help out with the holes.
Why don't you guys plant?
And then all we gotta do is place this facing downwards, so that makes a root, and then all we gotta do is nicely just bury it. Because if you compact it, it has a chance of ruining the sprout what's already sprouted. Just gotta nicely give it a little tap, and then good to go.
Why do we need to worry about the popsicle stick thing?
So you remember which one it is.
Because they literally look like just piles of dirt, and someone may come along and be like, oh, this is already planted, okay, because they won't see the holes, so they might just plant seeds over top. But that's not good, because that has a chance of hurting the other seeds.
Squanchton. Squanchton. Ma quaquanchken. Ma quaquanchken. Ma quaquanchken. Ma quanchkt. Ma quanchkt. Ma quanchkt.
Okay, so previously, Ms. Zoot's class showed us what we've been doing by pre-germinating our bean seeds in paper towel, in a moist paper towel, in a baggie. the seeds will germinate probably 5 to 7 days faster than they normally would. The orca beans, and these were planted probably 4 days ago, and they're already sprouting. If you can see that, this is the root coming out, and then the leaves will come up from the seed, and then it'll poke through. We planted in here like they did in the trays. It will poke through, and that's sort of the first set of leaves, and the seed pops off. And then this is the next stage, and it's getting its second set of leaves right in there. And at this point, when it's got its first true leaves, you can transplant it to the garden if the soil is warm enough. And we'll talk in a minute about cool season crops versus warm season crops. You should wait until the second true set of leaves shows, because if you look in here now, we can see the roots are quite developed. So this now would be ready to plant out in the garden. They already did the runner bean there. Plant a little hole, pop it in like that. So you got to make sure there's enough root stock on it. So at this stage, they're good to be potted up. We could plant these in the ground if the soil temperature was warm enough. There is a certain planting system that we go by. There's cool season crops or warm season crops. Cool season crops are all the crops that can go in when the weather's like this, sort of April, May, even March if it's warm enough. It's about the soil temperatures. So what we've been doing is we've been pre-germinating in the classroom, potting it up into the seed starter mix, and putting it in the greenhouse to grow to this size before we put it out in the garden or until it's warm enough. Now, cool season crops, which we've already planted, peas, greens, the root crops can go in around now or sort of the middle of April to the beginning of May. We have to wait until the middle to the end of May for warm season crops, which are tomatoes and peppers and basil and those sort of the heat-loving plants. We do start tomatoes and peppers really early in the season. I start mine in my greenhouse in like February, but I pre-germinate them, then pot them up, and then put them in my grow room and then into my greenhouse. So we did the same thing with the classes here. So all of our peppers and tomatoes, even squash and melons, they're warm season crops. The crops that we can plant directly into the ground without pre-germinating or starting ahead of time would be the carrots and the beets and potatoes and onions. We put those right into the ground about mid to end of April, beginning of May this season. But it's about the temperature. It's been a cooler, longer spring this year than general. Sometimes we get a heat wave in April. So the other things that we planted ahead of time, which can handle a little bit of cold, they can even handle a little bit of frost, is peas, spinach, kale, lettuce, radishes, again, any of the underground crops. The trick is to not plant root crops too early because they can germinate and then the seeds can rot if the soil's too cold. This is super mature and ready to go. As you can see, it's flowering. So it really needs to be outside with other squash. We're going to be planting a lot of our squash, pumpkins, and melons in the food forest on the different terraces so that they can cascade down and their leaves will be a green living mulch to keep moisture in the soil. We've got cucumbers here. They can take a little cooler temperatures, but really it is only about 2 degrees at night and in the early morning here still. So I like to wait until the temperatures I know are going to stay steady at about 6 above. The reason being that we don't generally plant until the May long weekend is not because it's the long weekend and there's more time to plant, but because there's always a full moon at the end of May. And a lot of people plant by the moon, especially traditionally. That last full moon in May is often a supermoon, which means that it drops the temperature between 5 and 10 degrees, potentially. So if we're only hovering at 2 degrees or even 5 degrees, and that temperature drops by 5 degrees, we're going to be hitting 0, and there's a risk of frost and losing all your crops that you've worked so hard to pre-germinate and grow up. Oftentimes, and I don't think it's out here yet, but we'll plant it in the ground and we'll put a cloche, and we've used milk containers that are in the greenhouse right now, and we just cover them for the night. And even a cut across milk container over top of that will protect it from any frost. I'm pretty sure we're not going to get any frost at this point, but that is the rule of thumb. Wait until the May long weekend to plant those crops. Corn is another one. So we're doing a Three Sisters planting, which is corn, beans, and squash. So all three of those are heat-loving and warm season crops. So we would want to pre-plant the corn. When we put the corn out at the end of May, we plop a pre-germinated bean seed at the base of the corn, which it climbs as a trellis. And then we would plant our pre-grown squash or pumpkins around the base of that. And then again, this would act as a living mulch, and it's a symbiotic relationship between all three species. These are giant sunflowers, but they've almost gotten too long to plant. You have to be very careful taking out the root, that you don't disturb the root too much. Sometimes I even plant some of the paper towel on there, which is fine because it's just biodegradable. But see how the seed is holding the leaves, and once this gets in the ground, it'll push up and pop the seed off, and then the true leaves will come out. See how I've left just part of the seed and part of the head out? That'll give it a chance to reach for the sun, and then pop that sunflower seed hull off, and then set its true leaves. And then if we want to use the domes, which is here, these are awesome because once you water this and put it on here and leave it in the sun, it creates its own microclimate. So then you have condensation that sort of keeps it moist. So it's great for the schools because they go away for the weekend and there's nobody around to water. This is a great resource that I did give to the teachers for the kids to follow. So in here is a seed starting chart. This is just a West Coast Seeds gardening guide. It's an awesome little guide because it tells you what to plant, companion planting, when to plant things, when to start seeds indoors, when to plant direct sow, all of the information that you need. There's little sections. So if I go to cauliflower, for instance, it'll tell me all about cauliflower, how to plant it, how to grow it, how to harvest it in little excerpts and all the different varieties. So if you can pick, it's a free gardening guide. You can pick that up. Some seeds are way better germinated in ground. The greens, carrots, beets, all the smaller seeds are way easier than to try to pre-germinate them. Tomatoes is one that we do pre-germinate, but this is not ready to go out yet, and it's getting too big for this pot. So the timing is essential. But if I take this in a larger pot, I can get another 2 or 3 weeks of growth before I'm able to put it out. So I'm going to put our potting soil in here about a halfway. I'm going to grab the watering can and I'm going to pre-soak the soil. And I got it about 2/3 of the way. I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to let that soak in. And tomatoes are an interesting plant because you can plant them twice as deep along the stem and they'll re-root along the stem, making a much stronger plant. So a lot of people like to plant them very deep. I'm just going to pull off the bottom leaves. Then I'm going to loosen up the pot. Okay. And I'm going to tip it over. And I'm going to look at all the root growth. Now this isn't too bad. It's not root bound. There's just enough roots on there. I'm going to loosen them up a little bit, tease them up. I'm going to do a hole right down to almost the bottom here. And I'm going to plant it way down that deep. Okay, so it's quite deep. I'm going to fill the rest of the pot up all the way to the top of the bottom roots there. And over the next 2 to 3 weeks before we actually are able to plant these out in the garden, this will give this plant the opportunity to re-root all along its stem, making twice as strong of a plant. And depending on the variety, we'll want to stake some of our tomatoes on really tall stakes. Some tomatoes are indeterminate and they can grow about 6 feet tall. Some are bush varieties or determinate and they'll maybe only grow 2 or 3 feet tall, so they don't need to be staked as much. So that's a quick rundown on seed starting and germinating and pre-germinating. The kids have learned a lot this season. I know that they were able to tell you a lot about what they have learned, so I'm hoping that everybody else joins the gardening bandwagon and learns from these videos. Thanks.